There is an
Okay.
interesting intra-party fight playing out, though. We have one of our writers, Seth Klemmen, he wrote a story a couple weeks ago about a poll that One Main Street did. This is a Democratic group of pollsters, consultants. There's some like heavy union ties to some of the unions, and they're much more favorable towards, they want the Democrats to go much more moderate direction in Colorado, as opposed to the progressives you mentioned who have been ascendant here and been controlling a lot of the policy at the legislature. They're trying to kind of push back against that and say, hey, you know, this could hurt you in the long term.
So let's get a report of what's going on down at the state legislature. But first, subscribe and like our channel. Click on that little bell icon for notifications and find Devil's Advocate podcast on your favorite listening app. So, Jon Murray, Denver Post, everyone wants to know, why the hell did you fire me from the Post?
It was my personal decision, and I was not involved in that decision.
Oh, so you're just going to brush it off?
I'm going to totally deflect.
That's just like reporters. Stand up for your... Actually, I do have...
It is just like reporters in that we still have that wall between editorial and the news side.
That's a good thing. All right. Let me ask you this one. I've asked several friends who are reporters the same question, and I'm curious about the distrust in media. Right now, the media is less trusted than Congress, which says a lot. In the 70s, about 85% of everyone in America trusted what we call the legacy media. Now, that is a third of that. Republicans only trust guys like you 12% of the time. 12%. Unaffiliateds are about 27%, and Democrats are still a majority that they like you at 54%. What happened, particularly with Republicans? Why is it the mainstream media has lost so much faith from their readers?
I have a couple of theories on this. I don't know how compelling everybody will find them, but at least this makes sense to me. I think there's a big picture of trust in institutions. You mentioned Congress. That's often in the gutter, but that's gone down too. Government in general, nonprofits even. People, I think, in this polarized age that we're in, I think it's a byproduct of polarization, from the last 20, 30 years, that people just are less trustworthy of institutions. And the media as a whole is an institution, for better or worse. And people are just not trusting what they're hearing from anybody, more or less. So I think it has some downstream effects like that. Second, I think that people tend to, conflate's not the right word, but kind of maximize their view of the media and put the Denver Post or local news in the same boat as they consider MSNBC, Fox News, CNN, where there's a lot of really firm opinions about the national news networks because they're kind of ever present. People have 24-hour news. I tend not to watch it a whole lot because I honestly don't find a lot of value in it. But people do, or they have opinions about it. They think they're polarized. Therefore, they don't trust those, and they also don't trust local media as a result. And then I think some of it, too, is that, whether it's mistakes or reporting they disagree with, there's social media age. People nationalize kind of problems, or things travel fast, or, something that happens here gets well-known other places. And so, yeah.
And here's why you're wrong on all that, because that's why you came here, was to be lectured. One, if trust in institutions are going down, that explains a lot of it, but still the difference between Democrats who trust the mainstream press 54% of the time, again, and these are Gallup numbers, and Republicans at 12%, there's something there.
I think there's always been a gap. I don't have the data at my fingertips, but my perception is there's always been somewhat of a gap where Democrats have been a little bit more trusting of media than Republicans, and maybe there are theories about why. I don't have any good ones myself.
My theory has always been that there's just not any real ideological diversity in legacy media. And when I read the Post or listen to NPR, I hear people from a progressive point of view. The stories are usually oppressed versus oppressor kind of stories. I don't find the liberty stories or looking at any story through that lens. I don't see it, and I don't hear the questions asked that talk to me. And so I think there's just a lack of diversity, and that's one of the reasons why people go to their own sites. They go to social media, or they're going to find their little niche. I really worry about that in the long run, because I think it's going to put us all into these little camps. We're going to be hearing just our side of the story, and there's not going to be a crossover. There's no paper of record anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that is, I think, always worrisome, whether we agree or disagree on the causes of it. I mean, the lack of having, a common set of facts that we're all basing the same conversation on is always a problem.
All right, I'll let you off on this one. I blame you personally.
Yeah,
all right,
it's good.
For me losing my column and for liberal media bias.
You still have a column somewhere else, though.
Yeah, but I was hated at the Post. You don't seem to understand. Every time I put out a column, the readership hate was it was intense. The death threats, the insults.
Were you like the Hulk? You grew strength from that hate?
I loved it. Yes, I was like, I'm in enemy territory. It was wonderful. All right, let's bring it to the legislature. You have a staff of political reporters. You look over the state of Colorado. Has anything changed in the last couple of years? It seems like we've got a crazy progressive legislature, and I don't get a sense that they've really felt anything from the red wave that attacked the rest of the nation.
It's an interesting question, because you can go back to 10 years ago, and the Democrats and Republicans were quite competitive in Colorado. It was very much a purple state. Donald Trump changed that, I think, because of the way our demographics fit into national trends. We have a lot more suburban unaffiliated voters, and not nearly as many of the blue-collar types you find down in, like, Pueblo. We have a pocket down there, but we don't have a lot of industrial or blue-collar workers in Colorado compared to a lot of places.
Some in Adams County, which I think was one of the reasons why there was a switch there.
Yeah.
In this
so you
congressional
see, you see some of these national trends at the local level here, but my point is that there's been a blue shift in the last 10 years during this Trump era because of kind of the backlash against Trump. And so that's meant that the Democrats have been ascendant at the state level. They've got these wild majorities.
I'd add in the demographic changes here, that the growth in our population largely comes from California, New York, Illinois. These are people who are already attuned and acclimated to a lot more government.
Sure. So I'm sure that's plays a role. Yeah, but we've gotten such big Democratic majorities, and they haven't seemed to change. Like, even in this last fall's election, where it was very much an election that favored Republicans nationally, and you saw Gabe Evans unseat Derek Caraveo here. You mentioned Adams County; that's part of that district, at least part of it is, and the Democrats lost a little ground. But we're talking about they went from having a supermajority, one seat shy of a supermajority in the state house, and they more or less held steady in the Senate, which was a few seats shy of a supermajority. So it didn't hurt them necessarily. There's a few levers they don't have.
I know Republicans are like, we got victories here. We're no longer in the super minority, and that's
There is an interesting intra-party fight playing out, though. We have one of our writers, Seth Clement, he wrote a story a couple weeks ago about a poll that One Main Street did. This is a Democratic group of pollsters, consultants. There's some heavy union ties to some of the unions, and they're much more favorable towards, they want the Democrats to go much more moderate direction in Colorado, as opposed to the progressives you mentioned, who have been ascendant here and been controlling a lot of the policy at the legislature. They're trying to kind of push back against that and say, hey, this could hurt you in the long term. And so they did a poll of Colorado voters that did show that there's a distrust of Democrats on the economy and several other issues, that they identify Republicans more with working class issues, and that fits with that national narrative of why Trump won in November, even if Kamala Harris still won here. So there is that kind of discussion happening in the Democratic Party. a lot of the progressives don't want that to be happening because it's kind of pushing back against their interests.
It's interesting. The Republican dysfunction in Colorado is so delightful.
Are they? I
So
haven't
entertaining.
noticed.
Yeah, I noticed. And so it gets a lot of press. And how do you not give press to, when people have to give money out of state to support Republicans here because they don't trust the party, how do you not report that? I get it. But it's not like Republicans have any power. And so the more we focus on, as journalists,
and to that point, it's interesting to me that the one way the Republicans have been ascendant is we now have a 4-4 congressional delegation, despite the demographic changes in Colorado. And a lot of that is because of Republicans who are running and not in lockstep with the state leadership.
That's a superb point. That they didn't touch it, and in fact, so many of the folks that the party endorsed lost in primaries, lost otherwise. But the story, in my mind, is not Colorado Republican dysfunction. It is this growing civil war amongst the Democrats. I mean, they've got all the power. Who cares what the toddlers in the Republican Party are screaming over? And talk a little bit more about what I see as this real civil war kind of brewing of I'll put it between socialists and progressives. That there's a battle, and even the Speaker of the House seems to find herself in the middle of it.
A little bit. There was a bill that's in the works. It hasn't been introduced yet. We wrote about it last week. One of our writers that is kind of spearheaded by the Colorado Chamber of Commerce. It has, at least as of last week, it had more prospective Republicans signing on than Democrats, but it did have Speaker McCluskey and Majority Leader Rodriguez in the Senate, so two big Democrats signing on with it. Some support from the governor's office looked apparent, and this is to, it's one of those study bills, right? So take it for what you will. It doesn't have a lot of teeth, but what it does is it would say, hey, we want the auditor's office, the state auditor's office, to take a look at all the regulations that have been passed in Colorado this last decade that have to do with health, that have to do with climate change, that have to do with oil and gas and things like that, and just like paint us the whole picture. And are there too many of them? And so you see a lot of this right of center and center and left of center signing on to this, and it's really angering a lot of the progressives over there that this is happening. And
it's interesting.
That's interesting to me.
And you think Polis will sign on to this?
It looks like there's some support from his office for it,
That's surprising, because so much of this regulatory growth, and I think that's the untold story of the Polis
And I guess
years.
I should say I don't know for sure if he will. I can't remember if he was one of the ones doing it.
The untold story is the explosion of the regulatory state in Colorado. Things that were just, councils are now commissions that have real power. I think of the Air Quality Commission. They have PUC power.
You look at Polis's climate rules and things like that. That is one way in the 6 years that he's been governor that he has really seized control of state government and harnessed it for his agenda.
Right. In the same way people say, the president has too much power. Well, here the executive has a lot of power because they're propagating more and more rules, more and more regulations, and the legislature is empowering the executive more and more, which is fine right now as long as it's a Democrat. But sooner or later, you could get a Trump as a governor, and they might not like giving that governor so much power.
Yeah, there's always that risk, right? I mean, you look at the federal level, there's always been these debates about executive power, and now you see Trump harnessing it like not a lot of presidents have done in the past, and there's a hue and a cry from some folks who maybe supported it when Barack Obama was president.
Right, and the idea is, well, then stop giving the executive so much power. Stop building all these agencies that this guy's going to run. I mean, and you probably have seen this. People in the legislature, people in Congress, they're pretty short-term oriented. They're not thinking about what this little change is going to do in a century. They don't think, we're going to build the EPA. Well, that's a good thing. And then it turns into this behemoth later. So let me ask you about some of the particulars going on. The Labor Peace Act is something Colorado has had for 80 years. We've had this détente between labor and management. And I get a lot of guff from my friends across the nation, like, why don't you have right to work? And I'm thinking, we don't need right to work. We've got this gentle peace here. it looks like that piece is going to be broken.
I think
is
that's the fight of the session. I think one of the
what
fights of the
is
session.
what is the current situation? What is the change being proposed?
So the current situation, and we'll say we did some reporting a few weeks ago on this that looked at some of the history, and there is some disagreement about the extent to which this was some grand compromise versus, was it sort of put through by one side over the other. But you're right that it has served as sort of a détente for the last 80 years. And what Colorado law has is something that no other state has, which is that if you are unionizing, you have to pass 2 elections if you want to end up in a situation which most unions do, where they're able to collect dues and fees from workers to sustain their own
By the way, when you say
organization.
collect, you mean whether they want to be pay them or not. That's the thing. Mandatory dues, even if you're not a member of the union.
Right, that's part of that. And so it says that you have to have this second election that has a larger threshold in order to be able, not to automatically get these mandatory dues, but to be able to negotiate for them with management. And so it creates this, the supporters of this current state argue that, like, hey, this makes sure that the union is organized and that they are really representing a consensus of the workers, not just 50% plus one. And unions, for obvious reasons, don't like this because it does impede their organizing or makes it harder for them.
What I find immoral about it is that you shouldn't be forced into associations. The First Amendment says you have the freedom of association, which also means you have the freedom not to associate. And so to say, oh, yeah, you don't have to associate with the union, but you have to pay them. You have to give them money as a condition for employment. It's just really ugly. And
that's always been one of the big philosophical debates around unions, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, Colorado has this second election requirement. No other state has it. This proposed bill would eliminate that.
So what's going to happen is, if they pass this new law, it lowers that threshold so that at 50 plus 1, you unionize.
Right now, you can unionize at 50 plus 1, but you would be able to then go into negotiating with management saying, hey, we want X, Y, Z, including mandatory dues, including this. We don't need this extra threshold of our supermajority of our members just in order to ask for that.
When you say this is the fight of the session, I agree. This is the fight of the session.
Well, it gets at so many of the divisions between progressives, between more moderate Democrats, between business and labor, between our sometimes libertarian governor and the people in his party in the legislature. It's not often that he outright threatens to veto bills, but he has outright threatened to veto this bill to many lawmakers' faces. And they're still plowing forward. They want to push his hand because he vetoed several other labor-related bills last year that really kind of pissed them off.
As it stands now, my guess is he would veto it. He is a talented politician, and my sense is he doesn't like to veto anything that comes from the Democrats, including this. I wouldn't be alone to say the guy has some aspirations after this, and you're not going to become president if you piss off the unions. Here in Colorado, that's not a big deal.
That's a good observation because it also plays into some of his machinations on the gun bill.
Indeed.
Which I'm sure we'll ask about.
Let's get to that next. But so I know he doesn't want to see this on his desk. No politician wants to make those calls because you're going to anger this side or anger that side. So the governor has been good in the past of, coming up with some sort of compromise. He can put his name on, but it's not as deadly. I don't see how this can find a compromise. On gun control, you can say, all right, we'll do this, we'll do that, we'll do this.
They seem to have done it on the gun control one, possibly. But yeah, on this one,
it seems like either you force unionization with a simple majority vote, or you don't. And I don't know how he's going to get out of this one. Or am I missing something?
He's not said a whole lot publicly about what he would like to see, because you're right, it's kind of hard. You have to thread the needle a little bit because the business and the labor sides really aren't meeting. They've been meeting to try to find a compromise, and there's been some reportedly some proposals put back and forth, but nothing that really moves any ground. I think one comment I did see him make, I think it was at the Colorado Sun's recent or at the start of the legislature kind of gab fest where they asked the governor about it, he did say there that, well, maybe he could see a potential compromise where you keep the second election, but you lower the threshold. I think it's something like 70 or 80% now. He's like, well, let's play with that number. What if you make it, he didn't say 60%, but something lower.
Because it's 75% now.
That sounds about right. And yeah, I don't think that made either side excited to find that agreement.
Yeah, I would agree.
One side wants to get rid of that completely. The other side wants to not change anything.
As of recording this thing passed out of committee. I don't know if it goes to the full House floor yet or not. Give me a prediction.
The Senate, which the last few years, to borrow a federal or national phrase, has been more of a kind of cooling dish for the legislature. It's more progressive than it was a year ago from the most recent elections because of people who left and people who joined. So the Senate, yeah. The House has been the more progressive side. But I could see it passing both chambers. And then the question is, what is Polis going to do about it? And does he want to take that stand? He's been outspoken enough that it would be, anger his business allies if he then turncoats and signs it. So
our libertarian governor. I love when people call him a libertarian. We're going to find out how libertarian it is on this one. People ought to know that Colorado does not have right to work, which means that people don't have to join a union to keep their job. And we've never pushed that at Independence Institute, but we've got an initiative in the works. If this thing gets signed into law, next year people will be voting on a right to work initiative, and that's going to be interesting. I think that people here in Colorado don't like the idea of being forced into supporting organizations they may or may not agree with. It's just not part of the Colorado character. Maybe Colorado has changed. The other thing that's changed in Colorado is appetite for gun laws. As a gunny myself, I'd open up the catalogs and see a product or a gun and it would say, not available in Massachusetts or California. And I was like, but in a Western state, that would never happen. Now I open up gun catalogs, not available in Massachusetts, California, or Colorado. I'm like, how could a Western state do this? Where are we on this semi-automatic ban? Mm-hmm. It seems ridiculous that it's even gotten this far.
Well, this bill it would go further than a lot nationally have it, and it's an interesting concept. The last couple of years, the kind of so-called assault weapons ban. Gun owners will tell you there are no assault weapons, but it's kind of colloquially what's becoming known as these high-powered semi-automatic weapons.
We just want a definition.
Right.
Just this pornography word of assault weapons, and you say high-powered. Sure. No, it's not high-powered. A 223 is so much less of a round than so many other rifles. Mm-hmm. So if we want to drive people crazy, we go, just define it before you. And they end up saying things like, well, it's got a pistol grip. It's like, what is that? That's not even a mechanism. That helps you. And it might have a folding stock. So it's not guns, it's folding stock.
Sure.
So, yeah.
But in the last several legislative sessions, there's been attempts to pass what's called an assault weapons ban, to go after these weapons. And it didn't get anywhere, in part because Tom Sullivan, the state senator from Centennial, whose son was killed in the Aurora Theater shooting, he has kind of stood firm because he does support that policy at the national level, but thought the state doing it would be kind of blowing against the wind, one state doing it. However, he did come up with a compromise that is kind of creative that tried to define based on whether it accepts a detachable magazine. And so he framed it as, hey, we're upping enforcement of our high-capacity magazine ban, the over 15 rounds from 10, 12 years ago, that hasn't really been well enforced. Anyway, a lot of gun shops still have sold those. However, there was a compromise last week in kind of a wild night at the session in the Senate on Thursday night, where they went to about 2 a.m., I think is when they voted, just before 2 a.m. And they, under pressure from the governor's office, adopted this compromise that kind of, some would argue, threw Sullivan's argument out the window that this is just extending enforcement of the magazine ban because it carved out sort of a loophole like, hey, we're going to ban these guns. However, you can purchase them if you go through X number of hours of training and get certification, pass background checks, things like that, which led to some interesting philosophical debate on the floor. Obviously, they didn't bring many Republicans along with that argument, really none. But they were able to get a couple of wayward Democrats to vote for it that way.
And so now there will be registration of gun owners in order for people who want to go buy something with a detachable magazine, which is
yeah, you'd have
like,
5 years if you jump through these hoops to do it before you'd have to do it, re-up it.
And 95% of guns sold today have a detachable magazine. So what guns are getting covered by this?
It's and I will admit we're going against the limits of my own gun knowledge. I'm not a gun enthusiast.
We can take care of that, by the way.
Do you give each guest a pistol on the way out?
Yeah, you get a free Coke and a Glock.
Okay.
It was either that or a lifetime supply of turtle wax.
And sorry, your question was about what guns does this cover?
Yeah.
I think it's still, my understanding is it still covers the detachable magazine weapons. So some of that's pistols, some of that is rifles, generally semi-automatics. They still are trying to target bump stocks, things like that. But yeah, this would say you can't sell these weapons unless it's to a buyer who has jumped through these hoops that we have now set.
And for a constitutional right to keep putting it higher and higher out of risk, it just is maddening to guys like me who go, I haven't committed a crime. I haven't done anything wrong.
That was kind of the point made by Paul Lundeen, the Senate Minority Leader on the Republican side. He got up when this amendment was proposed in late Thursday night and said the way he sees it is, look, it's you're portraying this as now a privilege to own these guns, but the Second Amendment says it's not a privilege, it's a right. It's not like getting a driver's license.
Exactly.
That's not in the Constitution.
Furthermore, last year,
and so that's the philosophical disagreement.
There was a law to make any gun crime a felony. To actually say if you're committing a crime with a gun, we're going to hold you to a higher standard. So in other words, beating up bad guys instead of just beating up the law-abiding who owns guns. It didn't pass. Ridiculous gun laws passed, but to beat up criminals didn't pass. Is there such a bill this year? Because I want to see them fail that one as well. I just want to see them continue to beat up hunters and target shooters and people like me, but leave the criminals alone. Is there such a bill?
I am not aware, but I might be wrong about that.
All right.
Yeah, they did add another amendment on the main gun bill, Senate Bill 3, that exempted some guns that are common for hunting and sportsmen as well.
It's funny
As a
because
note.
there's no gun more common than an AR-15. By statistic, they are omnipresent for a lot of valid reasons.
Yeah.
And I say that as a guy who used to be a gun phobe and gave money to anti-gun groups.
Yeah.
So
let me ask you this.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you a question.
Like a reporter. Damn reporters.
AR-15s or weapons like that, do you think there should be any restrictions on them, given that they are so commonly used in
no different than any other rifle. Keep in mind that because it's black doesn't make it bad. It's no different. The mechanism is the same. I have a Mini 14 rifle, and when it has the wood stock on, I'm legal in Boulder with it. It's fine. It's got a wood stock. It's it's nice. I take off the wood stock. I put on a black polymer stock that might have a folding stock, might have a pistol grip, and now the gun is evil and it's illegal. It's like, what the hell? It's still one bullet, one pull, trigger pull, whether it has a nice natural wood stock or a more durable polymer stock. And so for those of us who understand guns, we go, you people are nuts. Talk about judging a book by its cover, and those items make it easier to use the gun in that you get more control, more accuracy with it with a pistol grip. It means you can carry the gun someplace, and it's a wonderful thing. Every law-abiding person should have an AR-15. We'll give you one of those as well.
Oh, I get one of those as my parting gift.
Parting gift with a 30-round magazine. Do with what you like.
Okay.
So as a guy growing up in the West, it is a mind-boggling thing that this could happen here. I mean, California, yeah. Massachusetts, yeah.
Is it mind-boggling when I mean, I grew up here as well, and I was a senior in high school the year that Columbine happened 10 miles away. I mean,
Yep.
we've had, I don't think our distinction of having mass shootings is all that different from a lot of places now because there have been so many, but we've had a lot of the notable ones. So I don't know if that is all that surprising that there's searching to find solutions to this.
The emotionalism is what gets me.
Yeah, and I understand the arguments that, hey, this is not really solving the underlying causes of mass shootings.
If you want to,
but I understand why
if you wanted to
the target is on
prevent
guns.
mass shootings, we shouldn't have kept kids out of school for a year and a half with COVID, so that they were removed from society. I think a lot of that is starting to really pop up. But furthermore, rifles cause only 4% of all gun homicides. So-called assault weapons are a fraction of that fraction. So out of all the rifles that are used from shotguns and hunting rifles and 22s, only a small percentage are what people think of as an assault weapon. So you look at it and go, wait a second, if you're trying to stop gun deaths, shouldn't you be outlawing all these other guns before you get the one that does the least amount of death? But it's an emotional issue. And I get that. But once you...
And some of the emotion is honestly born of that 4% of deaths, or whatever the figure is, tend to happen in just very high-profile mass casualty incidents.
Exactly.
So I think I understand the emotionalism.
And who makes it a high-profile event compared to other deaths that are low-profile? That would be the legacy media, I think, which also I think has a huge anti-gun bias. So yeah, it's very sad to me. It's sad in this place I grew up to see this happen. And when it passes and gun deaths don't go down, at some point, don't you stop beating up good people? I mean, don't you stop whacking the heads of law-abiding gun owners and go, maybe we ought to do something about the bad guys?
Well, yeah, I'm curious to see how that goes out now that it's been amended.
Let's switch to...
presumably the governor will be on board with it now.
Presumably, because you cannot win a presidential primary if you vetoed an assault weapon bill.
Probably not, if that's the aspiration, yeah. And I'm sure that there will be some legal wrangling to follow.
The second biggest thing, I think, is the budget. So we've increased the size of the budget. We keep putting things offline by saying that they're enterprises. We keep doing wonderful tax increases called fees. We keep doing all these special tax breaks for this guy and this EV owner and that green energy thing. And now we're out of money. It's not a surprise. How bad is the situation?
I mean, I probably don't have to tell you that there's a role that Tabor plays here, and it's probably what you would argue is a good role, and a lot of people do. And if you're one of the progressives at the State House, you don't love the role that the Tabor
Even if you're
plays.
Republicans, you don't like Tabor because it forces you to make priorities.
If you're in government, yeah.
Yeah, Republicans don't want to make priorities either.
Yeah.
If you're elected, you don't like Tabor.
But yeah, we're in when we have these discussions, when we're editing stories, there's sort of maybe some folks who are distrustful of the media. They think that we're plotting, okay, how can we spin it X way or Y way? What we're really talking about is how do we make it more understandable? What are kind of the key facts and context to help our readers understand what's going on? And with Tabor, it's constantly a challenge, right? You mentioned earlier that there's a lot of new residents in the state. They don't know what Tabor is necessarily, or they see things show up on the ballot. They don't realize Tabor is the reason for them. So we're constantly trying to keep those folks in mind too, so we can help educate them as we're writing stories about the news. But one thing that comes into play with this budget is Colorado, yeah, there's some post-pandemic effects. There's, we're not a juggernaut economically like we were pre-pandemic. We don't have people moving here in droves anymore. We're still dealing with cost of living issues, some pretty big ones. But the reason that our state budget is not, or is, kind of in a clamp right now is not because of a recession. We're not in a recession. It's kind of because of these kind of unique Tabor issues. We're hitting up against revenue limits.
And also the federal spigot is
and the federal spigot
off.
has been turning off. Yeah. And they, there certainly was some care taken to avoid creating new ongoing problems with federal money, but they did give a lot of those grants out to locals. So the locals are having to to figure out how to deal with lost revenue. So there's all these problems from money spigots kind of turning off.
And from my point of view,
limits
this is the important point, because now politicians have to do what they're hired to do, which is make tough choices.
This is true.
And people don't get that when you put something in an enterprise, do a fee, it gets out of the general fund and it goes someplace else. And appointed people run those decisions. So when Tabor was passed in 1992, about 2/3 of all the money the state spent was through the general fund. People we elected did it. Now only 1/3 is, which means most of our government is being run by appointed, not elected people.
But a big part of that reduction in the percentage of the general fund is because Medicaid has grown so much too, which is Obamacare and expansion of Medicaid and things like that.
Fair point, but still, so in Colorado, where it should be controlled by the people we elect, it ain't, because of enterprising and doing these fees. And so
that's a fair point.
We keep electing these people, and I'd argue we basically have taxation without representation.
But the part that they do control with the general fund, that is what is in the clamp right now, and they're having to make some of these hard choices.
What's going to get cut?
That's kind of the million-dollar question. They're having to grapple with, a status quo budget for the next fiscal year, which starts in July, would be a shortfall of about $1.1 billion. I think it was the latest estimate last week. And so they've got to kind of figure that out. Some of that is potentially Medicaid related. A lot of it is programs like we had a story that ran yesterday about a child care assistance program that itself is costing the state, I think it's around $30 million a year in a typical year. So it's not a giant state program, but this is helping ensure that low-income people can afford childcare so they can work and so they can go to school, things like that. And the counties have been having to pick up a greater share of it, in part because the pandemic stimulus dollars have been cut off, and that was plugging a lot of the hole for it. So now they're in a position where, do they spend more money on this program from the money they don't have? And so that's competing against, there's hundreds of examples of that around state government right now, or at least dozens, I'll say. Don't overstate.
It's a good time. It's a good time when government doesn't have money for more programs. All right.
Yeah, the surest way to have a bill defeated right now is to have a fiscal note that says it's going to cost the state more money.
I like it. All right, hey, we got to go. Thank you so much. Last question. How many people at the Denver Post voted for Donald Trump?
I don't know.
Take a guess.
Not going to guess. We don't talk about who we voted for.
I don't buy that.
I know you've got an assumption about it, but I am not going to guess
about it. All right. From the Denver Post, denverpost.com. Thank you so much, John.
Yeah.
If you enjoyed that conversation, by all means, click one of these other great programs. We have the best conversations with the most fascinating Coloradans. And subscribe to our channel. Just click down below and hit that little bell button too. You don't want to miss a single show.